So new DLC for Halo Wars 2 came out, and this time it's Story DLC, which is technically the first story-focused DLC we've had for this series, unless you count that free Spartan Ops shit, where they reused every fucking map 100 goddamn times, or if you're like me and count ODST, since that really should have been a DLC anyway. So I got a fair amount to say about this, but I'll get the stuff I liked out of the way first, because even though I have more to say about the things I didn't like, I enjoyed the good stuff a hell of a lot more than I hated the bad stuff. First off, the gameplay is still really good. That's not really any surprise, given that the base game was on its own pretty good. Creative Assembly is great at making RTS games, what can I say? I'm still not a fan of this stupid Fog of War function and hate that they didn't remove it at least in the PC edition of the game, but I can at least forgive it partially because it does seem like the devs made an actual effort to utilize it in an intelligent way, like leading you into a trap in the 4th mission or even giving you specific leader powers to light up certain areas. I guess the reason I don't like it is because RTS games are supposed to be extremely tactical, and it's hard to be tactical when you can't see more than 50 feet in front of you. I had hoped that would change when Creative Assembly took over, or at least the PC version wouldn't have it, but we're stuck with it, and for what it's worth, it's at least utilized better than it was in the first game. Visually, it's really good. The insane level of detail for each of the units and even their bases is appreciated. Sometimes I like to just check out some of the scenery because it's genuinely great. The blur cutscenes are gorgeous as usual, and voice acting during cutscenes is rock solid, though in-game the voice acting is really spotty. I don't know if they had someone else voice Atriox in-game or if they put way too heavy of a filter over his voice, but in the one part of the DLC where he actually talked in-game, I couldn't for the life of me understand a single fucking thing he was saying. I get that you're trying to pull off the radio effect, but if I need the subtitles to understand what he's saying in English, then your filters are detracting from the overall experience. Structurally, the DLC is fantastic. I love how, unlike the first game, the devs went out of their way to make this feel like a structured campaign by blending the linear elements of a structured storyline with the freedom of RTS gameplay. The few things they do to make the story come alive is actually pretty great, and I have to give props to the devs for keeping in mind the freedom an RTS title needs, while also making the story much more coherent than its predecessor, like having your armies fall back in waves during a flood swarm or sending only a very small amount of soldiers into a Forerunner facility. I'll talk about the plot itself in a minute, but I actually really like the perspective of the Brutes. We haven't really seen this before unless you count Halo 2, which was far more focused on the elites. It might have been a small thing, but the one part early on when you actually fight humans did stand out to me. I would have liked if there was a little bit more to that, or at least just a little bit more personality rather than them just being there, but I did like that since we've never really seen that happen in a Halo game before. Now if 343 can just go the extra mile and implement that intelligently into the main games, that would actually be really fucking cool. My only issue with the Brutes is that, once again, they're very inconsistently designed. This wasn't an issue that originated with 343 though, this was a Bungie issue too. What happened to the Brutes looking like giant hairy ape monsters? Why do the two main characters of this DLC look like angry naked mole rats with elephantitis? Their armor, weapons, and vehicles all look pretty cool, but their faces are just off, which is weird because Atriox actually looks like a Brute and he looks really cool. You know, you don't have to shave their heads to differentiate them, right? The environments are gorgeous and the effects are very well done given the limitations of the Fog of War effect. The only hitch I noticed was that in Mission 3 there was a good amount of frame rate drops. I went from around 70 to 80 frames to around 45 to 50. Nothing unplayable, mind you, but the large amount of enemies, the multiple things happening on the map all at once, and the fact that the whole map starts shaking early on in the mission did cause significant drops. It was more of an annoyance than anything, and it didn't really hurt my ability to play the game, but it is there. There was also a few times where the command prompts just wouldn't work at all, like I'd tell my leader unit to use his special ability and he wouldn't do it, or I'd tell my army to move up and they just stay there, or I'd try to build something and the build menu wouldn't pop up. Usually just pausing the game for a few seconds and clicking resume would fix the issue, and it didn't happen nearly enough for it to be a huge problem, but at least on PC the bug is there, so maybe someone could get on that and fix it. Also, I don't know if anyone else is having this same problem, but it seems like every ever since I installed the DLC, my game has been taking way fucking longer to load than usual. Not load in between missions, but the starting menu just takes fucking forever. I have a pretty fucking good PC, so I don't understand why all of a sudden this is taking so much longer than it was prior to the DLC's install. Also, I don't know if there's new music made specifically for this DLC, or if it's just the same from the base game, but if it's new, I actually really like it. If it's old, then I guess it must have been better utilized in this DLC than it was in the base game, because I noticed it a lot more here. As it stands, I have played the base game at least 3 times, and I can't recall a single track, but here I can remember at least a few of them. Overall, it's a serviceable DLC. It's fun, it looks good, it plays good, small things that help with the narrative are pretty unique, especially in an RTS, and I appreciated that level of effort from the devs. Phoenix Logs make a comeback, and that is also much appreciated. I'm glad that they're actually trying to stick with that idea. If you're planning on buying the DLC regardless of the rest of my opinions, then you can rest assured that it's fun enough to play it again, and in particular, the 4th mission is actually very surprisingly challenging and provokes legitimate thought when taking on those enemies. I think it might actually be one of my favorite RTS campaign missions ever. It was actually really surprisingly fun. But I do have some issues. First off, let's talk about the plot. This is very mediocre, same as the base game. There's very little in the way of character development and shows off one of the most cliche stories I've seen in a video game. There's 2 brothers, the hot-headed one and the calm-tempered one. The hot-headed one obviously does something he shouldn't, and the 2 have to work together to fix the problem. Their dialogue is cheesy in some areas and vanilla for the rest. It's nothing you haven't heard in any buddy comedy or better story done years prior. I had hoped that they'd spend more time trying to flesh out Atriox, but he only gets pissy with them in the beginning of the final mission, and he has a very short part to play in the final cutscene. I went back and timed how much screen time he actually had in this DLC. Excluding the 3 seconds in the first cutscene where all he did was stand around menacingly, he was in this DLC for less than 2.5 minutes. I was actually pretty receptive to the idea of brute-focused DLC, just because I wanted to see this big villain they spent the entire ad campaign trying to build up do anything. But as it stands, he shows up so little in this DLC that if the characters didn't constantly say his name every 11 seconds, I would have forgotten he was in it in the first place. There's more character development for him in the commercials where he sells used cars than there is in the entire fucking game. I guess instead of putting a lick of effort into fleshing him out as a character in the games, I'll have to go read another book to figure it out. Which sucks, because rather than getting more of this cool fucking villain, we get to follow Dumb and Dumber. And honestly, I wasn't a big fan of this DLC's premise. Now I know I'm gonna get some flack from some extremely fervent 343 fans that will just accept literally anything, but let me explain why I'm not a fan of this. So remember in Halo 3 when Cortana explicitly said this?
Reactor, start a chain reaction. Destroy High Charity. Destroy High Charity. Destroy High Charity. Start a chain reaction. Destroy High Charity.
So when in Halo 3, we decide to blow up the reactors, which Halo Canon claims are only the secondary reactors, but I replayed the mission, found all the terminals, read up on the Halo wiki, and went into the Halo Mythos book and went into the Phoenix Logs, and I could not find anything outside of one fan forum post from 7 years ago saying these were secondary reactors, so citation needed. But in the game, Cortana specifically says that destroying the reactors will cause a chain reaction that will destroy High Charity. And even as we're flying away at the end of that mission, we see explosions erupting from its surface. So even if they were secondary reactors, she said specifically, start a chain reaction. I'm not sure if you're aware of the concept of a domino effect, but a chain reaction works in the same exact way. Hit one domino and the other dominoes fall too. So even if they were just the secondary reactors, Cortana still said that the chain reaction will still destroy High Charity. Now, here's the argument. And when I say argument, imagine the biggest fucking quotation marks in history surrounding it for why High Charity is somehow magically in the game and still very much intact aside from a few shards of Rebel floating around. So the arguments go as follows. 1. They were only secondary reactors, which the game, wiki, and books do not corroborate, so it couldn't have destroyed High Charity. 2. High Charity is too big, therefore destroying the reactors wouldn't bring it apart. 3. We didn't see the whole fucking thing explode in Halo 3, so by that line of reasoning, we can only assume that the thing the game specifically said we did never fucking happened. Now, let me explain why these arguments are really fucking stupid. 1. I have looked everywhere. I looked through the terminals, through the Halo Mythos book, through the games, through the wiki articles, through the Phoenix logs, and cannot find anywhere that says the reactors we destroyed in Halo 3 were secondary reactors. What did you think the main reactor was? The Forerunner ship? Cortana literally says in Halo 2 that it was just a power source for the city. If all of High Charity hinged upon the functionality of the Dreadnought, then by that logic, the Gravemind wouldn't have been able to move it out of Delta Halo's orbit in the first place. So unless this crucial information is in one of the 50 fucking novels that are required to make sense of a video game, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that you're pulling shit right out of your ass to justify this blatant contradiction to the already established canon. 2. The argument of High Charity being too big is autistic. How many infinitely bigger things have we blown up at this point? We blew up a shield world in Halo Wars 1. We blew up another shield world in Halo 4 Spartan Ops. We used the detonation of the Pillar of Autumn, a ship that's infinitely smaller than the first Halo ring, to blow up that Halo ring. We prematurely fired another Halo ring that destroyed that too, and we used a nuke to vaporize the Didax ship, which isn't all that much smaller than High Charity. So let me get this straight. You can believe a single nuke will vaporize a whole ship, evidenced by all of the rubble floating around you in Halo 4. You can believe destroying 2 shield worlds. You can believe the destruction of 2 Halo rings. But when it comes to blowing up the reactors on High Charity, which Cortana specifically said would blow up High Charity, that's when you have a problem. Yeah, I guess the channel that's dedicated to talking about the Halo lore is very receptive to retcons, evident by the fact that he made an entire video trying to justify the blatant contradictions from Halo Reach as compared to the previously established canon. 3. We didn't see the whole thing explode at once, therefore it must not have happened at all. In what dimension does this logic even begin to make sense? Do you have a grasp of the meaning of the word implication? By that logic, I guess every off-screen death in any video game, book, movie, show, or comic ever must not have happened. Halo 3 was lazy with a lot of its backgrounds. It used fucking still images in multiple cutscenes, the destruction of High Charity being one of them. They still showed it wreathed in flames and being racked with explosions as we flew away. The implication is that it blew up like the game fucking says. But no, it must not have been like that, because that makes me feel better in justifying why this enemy I liked gets to come back for no reason. But it goes further than that. Let's just entertain the possibility that there's a snowball's chance in fuck that this is even a halfway feasible idea. Let's just pretend that this could ever be the case to begin with. Even if High Charity didn't blow up, the whole reason for prematurely detonating the Halo ring was to damage the Ark enough or outright destroy it so the Flood would be rendered useless. Now, obviously the ring was too far away to destroy the Ark, as Cortana said in the cutscene after the credits, but you're telling me that blowing up High Charity and on top of that prematurely firing a Halo ring that ended up totally obliterating that Halo ring and dealing great damage to the Ark couldn't wipe out the Flood population? Let's take it even further. Let's say the ring didn't destroy the Flood population. Let's say that High Charity did survive the catastrophic destruction of its own reactor. Let's say it did survive its own detonation with a Halo ring detonating right on top of it as well. At that point, you're left with the Sentinels building a big fucking wall around High Charity and calling it good. This DLC even makes the direct fucking point that the Ark is designed specifically to make sure the Flood are destroyed. You're telling me that the thing that makes the fucking Halo rings does not have the defensive procedures to halt a possible Flood outbreak on its own surface. We can see Guilty Spark obliterating entire portions of his own Halo ring for shits and giggles in the terminals, but there's no way to do anything even remotely similar on the thing that makes the Halos? You're telling me that the security forces on the Ark arc will just build a wall around a whole Flood army, rather than actually trying to deal with it in some way. 343 puts in all of these fucking enormous warship sentinels in the game, but they do nothing to try and burn out whatever's left of the Flood. They just leave it there, conveniently, so if anyone tries to get in, they can literally shoot their fucking way in. But wait, there is a justification for this, in the game no less. One of the Phoenix logs explains that they could destroy the Flood, but the monitor is conveniently offline. So instead of doing the halfway sensible thing and sending all forces to destroy the threat, they just build a wall around it and ignore it. Oh, well, that's wonderful. So wait, when the monitor isn't online, the failsafe for the most dangerous parasite in the known universe is to build a wall around it? The monitor is the most powerful and important asset on these installations. The one on Delta Halo getting captured by the Gravemind was catastrophic and left the whole ring to be quickly overrun by Flood. So why is it that on the biggest and most important Forerunner installation ever, the failsafe for a broken monitor is just to ignore the insane fucking problem and call it good? I would think that the failsafe protocol in such a disastrous event would be to focus all efforts across the entire installation on eliminating the threat, rather than building a big wall around it and allowing it to fester. No matter how much I try to justify this shit in my head, there is always some hole in the logic of how the Flood is even in the game in the first place. And then you have people saying, you should just be glad they brought the Flood back. Why? Why should I be glad they're dragging out a storyline played to fucking death across the original trilogy, Halo Wars 1, and the only fun part in those shitty mobile games? The whole point of the original 3 games was destroying the Flood, so we finally do that, and 343 decides to parade that storyline's fucking corpse around as well? Rather than going back to what made Halo 4 interesting, they're just pulling the Flood card again? Why would I be excited to fight enemies from a storyline we sealed up 10 years ago? It's one thing to make a game mode where you fight them, I'm fine with that, but bringing them back into the narrative is evidence to me that 343 is out of ideas. They're so fucking terrified of doing anything with the narrative at this point that rather than going back to what made Halo 4's story so legitimately interesting and cool, they're backpedaling to a story that they should already be done with. This reeks of the Force Awakens syndrome. Ever since Halo 5, 343 has been slowly but surely putting things back into the games so fans can trick themselves into believing that they're getting better. Nostalgia doesn't make a game. Bringing back the Arbiter in Halo 5 doesn't mean he's actually going to be good, since he did effectively nothing in that whole game. Bringing back the Flood does nothing if they're just going to be thrown in at random, with the Spirit of Fire conveniently having nothing to do with this catastrophic outbreak. Bringing back the Spirit of Fire in general does nothing if their entire story is, we accidentally found the Ark, so now we're going to kill brutes for 6 hours. Hooray. There are certainly things 343 needs to bring back. Bringing back the classic art style, bringing back the classic music, removing these unnecessary Spartan abilities that fundamentally do not mesh well with the core Halo formula, things like that are necessary. But story regression? Ever since Halo 4 Spartan Ops, 343 keeps going back. People didn't like the half-ass Spartan Ops missions? Let's just make a whole entire comic series just to write it out of the game. People didn't like Cortana dying? Let's immediately bring her back. People wanted to see the Chief actually fight the Didact? Let's have him do it in a comic and supercompose him for like no fucking reason. People didn't like the shitty Skynet plot twist? Let's go back and resurrect the original trilogy storyline rather than bothering with anything we've set up thus far. Look, a risk wouldn't be called a risk if there was no chance of failure. Obviously, 343 took a huge risk with Halo 4, and that game was almost entirely a failure outside of its general storyline. They took a risk with Halo 5, and it succeeded in some areas but failed horribly in others. But what you cannot do is get so terrified of a risk that you'll huddle back in your hole and show everyone the Flood again and use that as the crutch to make your game slightly better. Bringing back the Flood makes me really nervous. I want them to go back to the Forerunner shit. I want them to explore the Didact and the things he was doing. I want them to make the Prometheans interesting. They're still not, but I don't think that's really a story thing. The Flood brought a whole change of pace, and the Prometheans are just kind of there. I'm not averse to fighting Prometheans again. What they need to do is make them different. I appreciated what they did to change the Knights, and I hope they keep that in Halo 6. I think making the Crawlers more aggressive, maybe even making you fight more of them at once, making the Watchers more effective like they were in Halo 4, maybe adding a heavier unit like some walking tank mini-boss or something, or making the soldiers a bit more unique than a Knight without the weak points could easily make the Prometheans far more fun to fight. I don't like the idea of digging the Flood back up again. I already don't like that we're more than likely going back to the Ark in Halo 6 based on how Halo Wars 2 ended. It's one thing for 343 to try and go back to the gameplay roots that made the original so much fun, but I don't want story regression. My primary issue with Halo 5 wasn't based on the problems I had with the look of the game or the feel of the gameplay. They weren't based on some deep-seated hatred for 343 like so many fanboys seem to think I have, because, you know, harsh criticism of the developer must mean that I'm just a hater or a Bungie fanboy. But that's where some of these people are at. Harsh criticism equals senseless hater that sucks Bungie's dick. This DLC doesn't advance the story in any meaningful way. It feels like some sorry excuse to bring the Flood back in the next game. It does nothing to flesh out the new villain. It does nothing to advance the conflict between the Banished and the Spirit of Fire. It's a redundant mess of reused ideas with a shaky, cliche narrative to support it. No, I'm not thankful that an overused enemy that we spent half the fucking series fighting and eventually destroying has been conveniently inserted back into the narrative. I don't have this fucking boner people seem to have for this old-ass enemy that was part of a storyline we finished 8 years ago. I'm not thankful that the writing is so painfully, inoffensively mediocre that Halo Wars 2 comes down to Spirit of Fire finds Brutes on the Ark and they kill each other for 6 hours. Or the DLC where Brutes find Flood in the Ark and they kill each other for a few more hours. We don't need simplistic storytelling. We want you to incorporate the shit like character development and important plot points in the fucking game. I'll give them credit for the Phoenix logs. I think that's a really good idea, and I think they really should keep them from here on out. But they shouldn't be a substitute for character development. Some log on Atriox means nothing to me if you're not even going to make an honest attempt to flesh him out. I can't name a single thing about his personality. He had a shitty job in the Covenant, and then he got pissy when they tried to kill him. So now he masquerades around the galaxy killing anything that defies him. All he did in this DLC was get pissed off when the dipshit brothers fuck up and unleash the Flood, directly defying his orders. Wow, couldn't see that one coming. He's so generic and uninteresting. It sucks too because I genuinely wanted to like him. I wanted a good villain since they decided to just bullshit the Didact out of the plot. But no, he's a brute and he's evil, so we gotta kill him. What an interesting and complex character. No, not like the delusional religious fanaticism that drove Tartarus, who was visibly having a crisis of faith at the conclusion of Halo 2 and decided to remain willfully ignorant of the truth even when presented with hard evidence. That one scene said more about Tartarus as a character than Halo Wars 2 and its DLC said about Atriox combined. It even made a real-life draw to the delusional tendencies of religious people in our own world. Was he the best written character ever? No, of course not. But at the very least, there was effort made to flesh him out in some way, even if it was just a small bit of the game. And back to the length of the DLC, how the fuck is this worth $20? The campaign took me 3.5 hours to complete. Oh boy, you added a couple new multiplayer maps too. Oh boy, you added Tower Defense Firefight, which isn't even particularly different from Blitz Firefight. Is that really worth $20 to you? I was already irritated enough that I bought the Ultimate Edition of this game that comes with the fucking Season Pass, and yet the DLC that anybody actually gives a shit about is conveniently not included, and is also a third the price of the game. The blur cutscenes take up like 7 or 8 minutes of the whole DLC, and even though the environments are great, it still just reuses assets for everything outside of the Flood units. I'm sorry, but if one guy can make Dust and Elysian Tale, a 30+ hour game completely hand-drawn by him, animated by him, coded by him, including a ton of collectibles and side missions, combo, character and weapon levels, a full loot system, and includes a genuinely great story, and I can get that whole game, which has more content than a lot of AAA games on the market, for $20, and on top of that, it's made by one fucking guy whose only other assets were some voice actors, a couple audio editors, and game testers, while he did literally everything else, then you have no fucking excuse to sell this for a third of the price of the base game. Halo Wars 2 has infinitely more content than this DLC. This doesn't even come close to being worth $20. Yes, keyboard warrior, I know that Dust is a totally different game than Halo Wars 2. It's a totally different concept, a totally different genre, a totally different art style. But in regards to the price of the content, which already should have been included in the season pass or at least in the fucking Ultimate Edition, if I'm going to spend this much money on the DLC, then it should have at least as much content as an indie game pretty much entirely crafted by one guy. This is like a fifth of the content of the base game alone. It should at least be 1/3 of the content of the base game if you're going to charge 1/3 the price. $10. That's how much I'd spend on this DLC. I'd sell my asshole for less than the asking price of this fucking DLC. Speaking of the season pass, there is some extremely incriminating evidence that points to this game originally including Awakening the Nightmare in the season pass. Tell me, how many games can you think of, including a season pass, that doesn't even cover all the content beyond the first 6 months? The best I can think of is maybe an MMO has done this. But Halo isn't an MMO. Halo Wars 2 released in March of this year, and yet the DLC everyone's been waiting for, which came out 6 months later, conveniently isn't part of the $30 season pass. But look at the description of the original season pass. As you can see, it says, a new Halo campaign expansion with exclusive missions. Now compare that to the new description, which makes a very minor but very important change, and new campaign missions that expand the Halo Wars 2 story. So in other words, they retroactively removed this expansion and replaced it with 2 shitty side missions, threw in a handful of new maps and a few new leaders with slight alterations to their abilities, and called it good. For $30 fucking dollars. Then we get to spend an extra $20 for this. I bought the Ultimate Edition of the game. I also bought this DLC. In total, I spent over $100 fucking dollars on this game. You genuinely think this is worth that much money? You're joking, right? So not only did you deceive people into thinking that they'd be getting this expansion in the season pass, hence why there's so many people pissed off by this, but you're charging an outrageous price on a game, throwing in more microtransactions into the mix, and effectively pulling a fucking Destiny marketing scheme? Why? I liked it better when I just viewed 343 as being incompetent. Now they're insulting the intelligence of their fans with shitty videos justifying microtransactions and pulling shady moves reminiscent of the shit we've seen Bungie do with Destiny. Oh wait, sorry. It's not 343's fault, it's all Microsoft's. Always Microsoft. The dev team in any given situation never has anything to do with shitty business practices. It's always the publisher. The dev team can never ever be held accountable under any circumstances. My mistake. Just wanted to throw that out there for the guy I'm sure is already typing that comment down below. This is a really fucking slippery slope, man. That's some shady fucking shit. So The Witcher 3 can come out with a $25 season pass and include more content in just one of its expansions than everything in Halo Wars 2 combined, and 343 thinks a $100 price tag is justified? Oh, and on top of that, the game's been out for less than a year, and it already has a nice little $60 complete edition with all of the DLC and expansions. Thanks, 343. So glad I wasted $40 more on the game just to get fucked 6 months later. What a joke. Is this what gaming has become? Releasing season passes for half the price of the game, which at best includes maybe a fifth of the actual content from the base game, then conveniently excluding the biggest piece of that season pass to sell for more later after deceiving your fanbase and leading them to believe they'd be getting that in the thing they paid for, and then 6 months later giving us a complete edition of the game? 343 finally makes a decision I like to release story DLC, real story DLC, not the shitty Spartan Ops mode that nobody liked, and they infest it with shitty marketing employees to fuck the consumer. And the worst part is, people are defending this. I've actually seen people say that the devs have the right to remove and change content listed in the season pass at any time. This is the level of delusion we have reached. This stretches beyond even some of the most fervent fanboys. This has become a religion. This has become a cult. And anyone with any sort of criticism or has any fucking standards for themselves and for games is demonized for it. If you speak out against this shit in this community, you're blasted for it. How dare I have any kind of consistency in regards to the games I play and the business decisions that I like? I loved the original Halos, and every fucking time a new game comes out, I still give this company a chance. I still hope they'll impress me somehow. I have no fucking idea why, since I've never been happy with anything they've made. Halo 4 had a good plot, but everything else about it was garbage. Halo 5 had a good forge and decent multiplayer, but the gameplay didn't feel like Halo, the microtransactions were a joke, and the campaign sucked ass. MCC is still a broken mess 3 years later. Why do I keep doing this? Fuck if I know at this point. I gave Bungie a million fucking chances with Destiny and got fucked from every goddamn angle possible. I loved Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, and even though I'm excited for the sequel, I'm immeasurably pissed at the shitty microtransactions, Gold Edition, and DLC bullshit present in that game. Is it this fucking hard for people to have consistency? Apparently it is, because this issue will never go away as long as people continue to defend these practices. We're going to continue to get more No Man's Skies, where we're shipped out a broken, unfinished mess that didn't come out with even half of the content it promised until a year later. We're going to continue getting more Master Chief collections that remain broken and are never fixed. We're going to continue getting more season passes that have the bare minimum amount of content and lie to people to squeeze out an extra buck, and it is all because of you. You, the consumer, that keeps letting this happen and keeps defending it. So don't go around bitching about it later when you're the one defending it for the game you like. Consistency means you will apply the same level of scrutiny to all things. Yeah, I love certain books, I love certain games, I love certain movies, but I'm going to criticize everyone and everything by the same criteria. I'm not going to make up bullshit excuses because I happen to enjoy one thing. I've been playing Halo since I was like 7. I've been a fan of this series for the vast majority of my life. If I was such a fervent hater as people claim I am, why would I bother wasting my time and money trying to give these games a chance year after year? I love Halo. It's why I'm so harsh on it. I want the game to succeed. That's why I criticize its faults. I remember spending hours every day playing Halo. Now I play it maybe a few hours every couple weeks or so, if that. I bought my piece of shit Xbox One just for Halo. Nobody wants to see this game back on top than me. I'd love to see it in the first few rows on Twitch, rather than scrolling down several pages and finding that fucking Modern Warfare 2 has more viewers than Halo does. How? I didn't even know those servers were still online. So in regards to should I buy this, that depends on a number of criteria. If you're already a diehard Halo fan, then my opinion probably doesn't matter to you in the first place. If you're an RTS fan that just hopes for more content, then if what I presented in this video looks like it's worth the asking price to you personally, then sure, go for it. If you just wanted a fun DLC for a game that you already like, then yes, despite my misgivings for the narrative, this is really fucking fun to play. Again, just depends on how much you're willing to throw down on a several-hour story, a couple extra maps, and one very slightly altered game mode. But if you're like me and want a little bit more for $20 than some dull, cliche narrative spread across a few different maps, then trust me, just like with the rest of Halo Wars 2, you're not really missing much. This game already didn't feel like it took the Halo narrative anywhere. It's just killing the enemy team at best. It's a solid RTS, but nowhere near the best you can find, and certainly not the best by Creative Assembly at that. I've kind of drifted away from assigning number ratings to video games, and will likely start doing that for movies too, since I think numbers take away from the general nuance of what I have to say. So whatever you took away from this video, go for it. But before I go, I do want to address something that I've seen pretty much every time I've addressed anything Halo related at any point of time. I'm not the Act Man. I'm not Late Night Gaming. I'm not Favin or Halo Canon or anyone else. I've never really been a part of this whole Halo YouTube community, and judging by many of the responses I get from some Halo YouTubers as well as those YouTubers' fans, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that most people would probably prefer I never talk about Halo ever again. I make videos on whatever the hell I want, which usually tends to be about video games and movies. I'm very critical of storytelling and how it's done. Blatant contradictions, retcons, plot holes, and so forth get under my skin, so I usually tend to criticize narrative choices more in my videos because I have more to say about it. Hence why this video has taken so long to get through in the first place. But here's the thing you have to understand, since a huge chunk of Halo fans seem to get pretty pissy with me whenever I say anything. I'm a rude, offensive, sarcastic, egotistical personality online. That is a fundamental part of the character I portray on this channel. The opinions are still largely mine, but put through the lens of the Dishonored Wolf. I don't bear any animosity toward any particular Halo YouTuber. In regards to my 343 video, I don't really care about Xperia. The whole Iconic thing was a shitpost. It was intentionally inserted into my video to poke fun at him. I didn't even necessarily disagree with what he said in that art style video. I just thought it was badly presented and decided to make fun of it. Granted, I'm also a lot more confrontational and in your face. Something I will admit I've got to work on, specifically in trying to make a point on Twitter, which is probably the worst possible fucking platform for conversation or debate. But I don't have any specific anger or grudges against any Halo YouTuber. I'm subbed to a few of them myself and generally like their content, even if I don't always agree with everything they have to say. But the fundamental difference between what I do and what they do is they largely discuss specific topics and revolve their whole channel mostly around that, whereas I discuss various topics and put it through a character lens. Not many people are subscribed to me for one specific thing. They stick around for the character. I don't go out of my way to build my audience either. I don't really care that much. I make videos for me because it's fun, and anyone that finds it fun too is welcome to stay. Hence why there's so many inside jokes littered in my videos. I don't try to grow an audience. I don't take YouTube that seriously. Sure, it's cool to have tens of thousands of subscribers, but I don't go out of my way to gain them. If I actually gave that much of a fuck about growing my audience, then I'd completely throw out the personality aspect and be all nice and cheery so nobody would ever be offended and everyone would have a nice, happy, fun time. I don't make videos with the intention of them ever being seen by people from huge companies. I didn't make my 343 video to be sent to them. That was actually Xperia's job. You know, the guy that said 343 employees would be watching his art style video and then decided to make the argument that elites were so typically elite. But there's also another thing I want to address. Just because I'm saying something against 343 doesn't mean I love Bungie. Just because I think the original 3 Halo games are better than everything that came after them doesn't mean I support that company. I used to love them, but I hated their glorified map pack that was Halo 3 ODST, which although had a decent campaign was not at all worth as much money as they charged for it. I hated the things they did to the gameplay and especially to the story of Reach. I hated Destiny 1 and I'm not bothering with Destiny 2 because all the people I trust to give me an honest opinion of that game have come out and said it's not worth my time. So I'm not wasting my money on what I knew from the beginning was going to be a shallow, shitty game. It seems like every time I say anything even remotely critical of Bungie, I get mass dislikes because I insulted the fucking God Emperor, which is why I find it so fucking hilarious that anyone genuinely believes I'm a Bungie fanboy. I rarely discuss Bungie when it comes to Halo because they're not fucking relevant. Why would I bring up some shit Bungie did 10 years ago when I'm talking about Halo 5? They don't matter anymore. If I'm explaining why Halo 5 has glaring plot holes or why characters were badly written, I'm discussing Halo 5 objectively on its own based on the context of the writers and developers behind it. What the fuck does Bungie have to do with Halo 5? Nothing. That's the answer. Fucking nothing. I know this is apparently a really fucking difficult concept to grasp, since there's a lot of people, including even a couple major Halo YouTubers, who think that just because I'm criticizing one person means I'm not criticizing the other. That level of idiocy is astounding. I can't believe anyone would seriously make that argument. Yeah, shockingly enough, just because I'm talking shit about one thing doesn't mean I don't talk shit about the other. Fucking revolutionary. I'm sorry, but I have no respect for someone dumb enough to say, oh, well, you're calling out 343 for doing something shitty, but you're not saying anything about what Bungie did back in 2004. Yeah, because it has nothing to fucking do with this particular situation. If I was making a video about the original Halo games, then yeah, I'd start shit-talking their flaws, because they do have flaws. But guess what? I'm not talking about Bungie in regards to a fucking 343 game, because Bungie has nothing to fucking do with it. If you can't wrap your infinitesimally small mind around that simplistic goddamn concept, then please do not come back to my channel because you're clearly not mentally equipped for it. So before you type something retarded like, you only hate 343 because you're a Bungie fanboy, please try to act like you have even a basic understanding of nuance and context. Just because I didn't discuss Bungie in regards to a fucking Creative Assembly game doesn't mean I don't have criticism of Bungie in a million other ways, which I could make 50 videos on very very easily, but just don't give enough of a shit about that bastardized shell of a developer anymore. Anyway, this review has gone on long enough, so I'm gonna leave now. E621 is calling my name, and holy fuck do I want to